Okay, so can we please talk about how McDonald's is responsible for one of the biggest conspiracies? Yes, McDonald's. It became a massive FBI investigation and involved one of the biggest Italian mob families in New York. Well, around 1987, there was a little bit of a decline in the fast food industry, and McDonald's was really feeling it, so they were like, oh my gosh, how can we improve our sales? And this is when they decided to partner with Simon Marketing. And they had some amazing business ideas. They helped them come up with the Happy Meal, and they helped them come out with the Monopoly game. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I used to play it a lot as a kid. You would get this little sticker that you could peel off on the back of drinks boxes. It would offer you a free Big Mac, a drink upgrade, but some of them offered way bigger prizes, like jet skis, cars, all the way up to $1 million. Yeah, I never found one of those. But you could always bring it back and add it to your Monopoly board. And anyone could participate even if you didn't buy anything from them. Like you could just go in and ask for a chip or else it would have been considered gambling. McDonald's sales jumped 40%, so they were making bank. But it didn't take long for someone to tip off the FBI. Part 2 on the McDonald's conspiracy. So the thing about their Monopoly game is that it was a 1 in 250 million chance of winning. That is less than the lottery. But one day, the FBI was tipped off that the past 3 winners were from the same family. Like, that's actually impossible. And the name that was dropped for who was controlling all of this was Uncle Jerry. Obviously, this is a massive accusation to make. So the FBI was like, okay, let's look into this. And what do you know? All of the recent winners were from the Jacksonville area. So they were like, okay, is it someone at Mickey D's? Makes the boxes, delivers it. Either way, they had to call an immediate meeting with the McDonald's company. They didn't tell them why. They were just like, hey, you guys need to come down here. I would have been scared out of my mind if the FBI didn't tell me why they needed me. But the second the employees got there and sat down, they presented them with the case. And they were shocked. They were like, that is absolutely not possible. It's so rare to win this game, they should not be coming from the same area. And it was causing a major freak out. But luckily, the timing was perfect because they were about to release their next Monopoly game. And this way, they could catch someone in the act. Part 3 on the McDonald's conspiracy. So what exactly is a conspiracy? It's a secret plan made by a group to do something harmful or unlawful. And it didn't take long for this next Monopoly game to have a new winner. His name was Michael Hoover. The FBI decided to make a fake production company to act like they were doing a big commercial for him winning when they were actually secretly interrogating him. So they were asking him questions. He went into detail on how he found the chip, how he was gonna buy a boat and name it Ruthless Scandal. And then the FBI, being one step ahead, had already tapped him. So when he left, they heard his phone call, in which he basically laughed and said that he pulled it off, that they actually think he's gonna buy a boat called Ruthless Scandal. But they hear the name Uncle Jerry talked about again. So they had to do a deeper dive into who was working for them. And well, the company they partnered with, Simon Marketing, there was a guy who was head of security named Jerome Jacobson. He oversaw the whole process. Not only did he head all of security, but he also designed it as well. On top of this, he was responsible for taking the chip to the McDonald's location. But if the process was so thorough, how was he pulling it off? Part 4 to the McDonald's conspiracy. So what exactly made them suspicious of Jerome Jacobson? Well, the people that were getting the chips were all around where he lived. Like his nephew, his butcher, which, like, how can you be that stupid? You need to actually be spreading these out. But essentially what he was doing when he was on his way to those McDonald's locations was stopping at the airport bathroom, breaking the seal, taking the piece out and resealing it and leaving the bathroom. So he walked out with the prize piece and he was selling them off. For example, he sold one worth $200,000 or $45,000 to his nephew. Obviously, he realized it was looking a little sketchy, so he decided to get someone else involved, named Jerry Colombo. I know it's a little confusing because they're both Jerry. And he belonged in one of the 5 crime families that dominated New York. He wanted to promise his daughter a chip. And if you didn't know this, that's why Jerome Jacobson was being called Uncle Jerry. I guess uncle is a term of respect in the mafia. And together, they all teamed up to pick other winners, like Gloria Brown, who paid $40,000 for $1 million chip. And even Jerry Colombo himself got a Dodge Viper. With all this info, the FBI was about to make their arrest. Part 5 to the McDonald's conspiracy. The last place that Jerry sent it to before he was caught was St. Jude's Children's Hospital. I guess he decided to do something positive with his chips, but they did use that to track him down. And yes, McDonald's did let the Children's Hospital keep the $1 million chip. But Uncle Jerry was being followed by about 25 FBI agents and was officially caught. Him and 8 others were arrested, and 5 were indicted for collecting false prize. Jerome Jacobson had stolen up to 60 game pieces. He served 35 months in prison and had to pay $12.5 million in restitution. He's free though now and in his 70s. Jerry Colombo actually died in a car accident, so he was not arrested. And there's a lot of stuff around that being an inside job. It was a really sketchy car accident, and sometimes you just don't know with the mafia. Well, Simon Marketing and McDonald's sued each other back and forth, but Burger King responded by suing McDonald's for false advertising a promotion while knowing that the game was compromised. And they eventually just dropped the case. McDonald's started to give away a lot of cash prizes in response, and they officially stopped the game in 2016. Let me know what other conspiracies you want to hear about.
Do you know the story behind your zodiac sign? Here's one of the weirdest zodiac sign stories out there. This is the origin story of Capricorn. The story begins when Mother Earth had some serious beef with the gods, enough that she sent a fire-breathing monster named Typhon to fight them. And this is where the forest god Pan comes in. He had legs and horns of a goat. He told Zeus and the other gods to disguise themselves as animals in order to avoid Typhon. And while the other gods were disguised, Typhon approached Pan and was about to attack. So Pan panicked and jumped into the river Nile. Because of this, the lower half of his body, which was underwater, transformed into a fish, while the upper half stayed a goat. So that's why we have this sea goat creature to represent Capricorn, but that's not all. Zeus ended up battling Typhon and had the muscles in his hands pulled out. Pan healed him, which allowed Zeus to defeat Typhon in the end. Because of this, Zeus immortalized the image of Pan in the sky as the constellation of Capricorn. But which zodiac sign should I talk about next? Follow to see the rest of the series. Have you ever seen a painting that looked extremely realistic? Jake was waiting for his mom when he saw a strangely realistic painting, but he made one mistake that would lead to terrifying consequences. During his mom's doctor's appointment, Jake was sitting alone in the hospital waiting room. That's when he saw the painting. It looked so real, almost like a photo. He was promised ice cream if he sat quietly, but he found himself growing more and more curious. He felt like he needed to move closer to the painting, so he got up and walked towards it. The painting was of an old man, but there was something wrong with it. It seemed like the eyes would follow Jake no matter where he'd walk, but soon something even more unbelievable would happen, something no one can explain. The painting, needless to say, made Jake feel creeped out, but he tried not to feel so scared. It was a painting after all. Then Jake leaned in and saw one weird detail. The old man had unusually long fingers and fingernails. A bit later, Jake's mom came out of the doctor's office, but Jake was nowhere to be found. She called him but got no reply. Then she turned around and saw a very realistic painting on the wall. The boy in the painting looked oddly familiar. What if you can find out what your true soulmate looks like? Once a girl in Japan was scared that no one would want to marry her. She'd been single all her life and wanted to know what her soulmate looked like. So she played a mysterious fortune-telling game. But she could have never known the horrifying consequences this would lead to. To play this game, she filled a bucket with water. Then when the clock struck midnight, she leaned forwards with a razor in her mouth, and in the reflection she saw the face of a man. She was so surprised that she let out a scream. At the same time, the razor fell out of her mouth and into the water. Then instantly, the bucket of water turned red. But a few seconds later, it was clear again. And even though this was strange, the girl decided to ignore it. Years passed and she ended up dating a man. He was gentle, respectful, funny, and had a good job, but something was wrong with him. He would always wear a white mask, and anytime that she would ask him to take it off, he'd get angry, until one day he asked her to marry him. She was excited, though she wondered, how can I marry someone if I've never seen their whole face before? So she told him she'll only marry him if he takes off the mask. So he did, and what she saw would terrify her forever. Underneath his mask was a huge scar that went from ear to ear. She stared in disbelief and said, "What happened?" And he said, "You should know, you're the one who dropped the razor."
Part 2 to the Son of Sam. So the police noticed that the same shell casing was used, and so far all victims were female with medium-length brown hair. Well, it did not take long for another attack to occur. A man approached two women asking for directions. When he asked, he took out a gun and shot both of them, leaving one paralyzed with a spinal injury. And then after this came another couple sitting in a car. The police, having no leads, were like, okay, we're gonna need to announce this to the public that we have a serial killer on our hands. They released the few sketches that they did have, hoping for a lead. He was announced in the paper as the .44 caliber killer. The police also let the public know that he was looking for women with medium-length brown hair. So many women during this time cut their hair, dyed it blonde, whatever, so that they didn't match this profile. After this came out, he ends up killing another girl on her way home from school, and another couple who was sitting in their car on a date. But this killing was very different. This time, he actually left a letter for the police. I'm going to insert the letter. He introduces himself as the Son of Sam, and his wording is just a little off. So the news decides to write him back. Part 3 to the Son of Sam. So let me just talk a little bit more about this letter before we get into it. He obviously refers to his father as Sam and himself as the Son of Sam. He paints his father as this very abusive figure that's essentially making him kill. He refers to himself as Beelzebub and as a brat. And we'll get to this later. So a very famous news article writer at the time named Jimmy Breslin writes to him begging him to stop. And not only does the Son of Sam respond to him, but Jimmy publishes his response. This changed journalism. I'll put the response right here, but he uses words like "from the gutter," Sam's creation. Meanwhile, the public is preparing for the anniversary of his first killing. Pepper spray has been sold out. Everyone is terrified, and it just so happens on the anniversary, a blackout occurs. looting, burning down neighborhoods, and all of the cops were working that night. But they got through the whole night without anything occurring. But not long after, another murder takes place. Robert and Stacy are attacked on their first date. Stacy is the only blonde that he ever attacked, but leaving her dead and Robert blind. After this, the police were able to collect 5 sketches, but all of them were different. Part 4 to the son of Sam. Well, a woman ends up calling the police reporting suspicious activity. She was going for a walk when she saw a man hopping into his car. Instead of continuing into his car, he hops out and starts to approach her. She sees him start to take an object out of a bag, and she runs the opposite way, and then hears gunshots. Learning about all the nearby crimes, she makes the report. She also noticed that he had a parking ticket on his car. So the police find the parking tickets from that day from that area, figures out the license, and realizes the vehicle belongs to a guy named David Berkowitz. So the police call dispatchers inquiring about the ticket, and a dispatcher named Wheat Carr answers the phone, saying that she was his neighbor, and says, "Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Berkowitz. He's a very strange man who shot my dog that belonged to my father, Sam." So the police were like, Sam. Well, they get to his house and break into his car without a search warrant, and they find a lot of evidence, including a rifle, a map of the crime scenes, and a letter. So they wait for him to leave his apartment, and when he does, they ask him if he's David Berkowitz. And he responds with, "No, I am the son of Sam, and you got me." Part 5 to the son of Sam. So once they found and arrested David Berkowitz, they brought him in for questioning. And it only took investigators 30 minutes to get him to admit to everything. And his reasoning behind the killings was because of a 6,000-year-old demon dog who was speaking to him through the dog of his neighbor. He was the one calling the shots and demanding him to kill. And one particular investigator that was very obsessed with this case, named Maury Terry, was wondering why he didn't match any of the sketches. It's normal for eyewitnesses to be wrong to some degree, but you wouldn't describe Berkowitz as being 6 foot and blonde. There was also some worry if the evidence would even hold up in court, because they got it without a search warrant. But in court, David admitted to everything, so they didn't even need evidence. He was sentenced 25 years to life for each murder. So case closed, right? Well, if we look back to the letter, there's the name John Wheaties. Wheat Carr and John Carr are Sam Carr's children, Berkowitz's neighbors. And from looking at the eyewitness sketches, the sketches look more like John Carr, Sam's actual son.
When you go to sleep tonight, don't do what she did. Once there was a young woman named Alicia who moved into a very old house with her parents, but she could have never expected the horrifying things that this would lead to. After living in this house for a few weeks, things started becoming strange. Alicia noticed she was becoming weaker and feeling sick. Pretty soon she couldn't leave her bed and was asleep for most of the day. The doctors came to examine her and everyone wanted to find out what this mysterious sickness was, but no one had any answers, until one day Alicia passed away while sleeping. Then after her funeral, her mother came home and with a broken heart began cleaning her room. That's when she noticed something strange about Alicia's pillow. There were 2 small red stains. She picked it up and realized the pillow was unusually heavy, so she called her husband to go look at it with her. Then Alicia's mother felt something inside the pillow move. Her father opened the pillow and took all the feathers out. There they saw something crawl out. It was a monstrous black spider. Night after night, as Alicia lay in bed, this huge spider had been slowly drinking all her blood through her pillow. Do you know the story behind your zodiac sign? This is probably my most requested zodiac sign. Here's the origin story of Taurus. So we all know Persephone was the goddess of spring who had to spend half her time with Hades in the underworld and the other half on Earth. But what you probably didn't know is that there's actually more to the story. And it involves a wild bull that was completely out of control. This bull was called Ceres and people were terrified of him. He destroyed everything in the village. No local farmers owned him and no one knew where he came from. But one day Persephone appeared after her half of the year in the underworld was finished. That's when she found Ceres stomping on some flowers near the village. She went up to him and they quickly formed a bond together. Persephone was able to calm him, teaching him patience and kindness. Since then, every year Persephone would return, and as they walked together, spring flowers would appear behind their footsteps. And in the fall, when it was time for Persephone to return to the underworld to Hades, Ceres would also return to the sky as a constellation of Taurus. But which zodiac sign should I talk about next? Follow to see the rest of the series. Do you know the story behind your zodiac sign? Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite zodiac sign stories. This is the origin story of Scorpio. Once there was a great hunter named Orion who wanted to completely rid the world of all animals. He grew very arrogant and thought that there was no animal that could defeat him. So Mother Earth, or Gaia, sent Scorpio to unalive Orion and protect the animals. Scorpio attacked Orion during their battle and stung him with his large stinger, winning the fight. Because of this, Scorpio was able to save the animals, which led to Zeus wanting to honor Scorpio's bravery by raising it up to the heavens. However, Artemis, who really admired Orion, requested that even though Orion lost the fight, that he should be honored in the same way. Zeus agreed and placed Orion and Scorpio on opposite sides of the sky, and that's why even today, Scorpio can be seen chasing Orion across the sky. So the origin story of Scorpio is really to teach us to never be too arrogant and always try to protect others in need. Quite a nice takeaway from the story. But which zodiac sign should I talk about next? Follow to see the rest of the series. This man thought he got away with something terrible he did as a kid, but he was wrong. After Derek ignored the boy in the street asking him for 1 penny, he went home, but he always felt a bit strange about their interactions. Then he went into the attic and found his old yearbook. While flipping through, he found a photo that would haunt him forever. When he was younger, him and his friends were bullies, and they had done something unspeakable to a boy. After beating him, Derek and his friends threw him in the river without a second thought. The boy never showed up to class the next day, but Derek and his friends assumed that he moved away. How was it possible that the boy Derek bullied years ago was the same boy asking him for a penny in the street now? Even though Derek grew up to be a successful businessman, he held the yearbook in his hands, horrified at how his past had come back to haunt him. Within the next few days, Derek took out his life savings. He brought the bag of money out to the boy and said, "Here's every penny I have. Now please leave me alone." But the ghost boy just looked at him blankly. Then in an instant, his face turned into a terrifying smile. He said, "No, mister, that's not all," as the ghost boy reached into Derek's chest and pulled out his heart.
Imagine TikTok being so powerful that they actually help you identify the person that almost murdered you. On my For You page the other day, I found this viral video that you guys might recognize, which states videos I took before almost being hunted and murdered. I clicked on her page, listened to her story, and was like, I have to know more. So I reached out and got the full thing. This is the case of Flowers Don't Growl. April 29th through April 30th of 2019, Taylor and her boyfriend Chris decided to take a trip to Falls Creek Falls, Tennessee. Taylor was 5 months pregnant at the time, so they figured they needed one last little trip before they were going to have a baby. And Taylor swore that Chris was going to propose. So that's why she documented so much of this trip, not even realizing that later on it was going to be used as evidence. So they set up at their assigned camping lot. They spent their time hiking, exploring, having fun. Taylor would collect flowers along the way to document it for memory's sake, but please keep these flowers in mind. And then on the second day, everyone from their assigned area was gone except for them. So they were more alone than before, or so they thought. Welcome back to part 2 of Flowers Don't Growl. So later in the night on their last day, they ended up hearing a loud crash. There's very windy roads nearby, so they figured that it was a wreck. And just to make sure kids weren't involved and that everyone was safe, they got out of their tent and ran over to the crash site, which was maybe half a mile away to go check on the people. The sheriff ends up showing up and it's like a DUI situation, but everyone ultimately was okay. So before heading back to their campsite, Taylor says she has to go use the restroom. So her and Chris walk over to the bathroom so she can do her thing, and in the distance they see a light flickering. And as it gets closer, they notice that someone is running with a flashlight. So they're both cracking jokes to each other like, oh my gosh, this guy really has to go to the bathroom. But once he approaches the restroom, he ends up stopping right at them instead of actually going into the bathroom. And states, and I quote, "Wow, you guys are fast." Creepy. Taylor notices that he has a weird smile on his face and feels really nauseous but just associates it with the pregnancy. So just to be nice, they continue to have a conversation with him, but ultimately this is where things go wrong.
Storytime about how my dad shot my abusive husband. Disclaimer, this is not my storytime, it was sent to me on Instagram. My husband and I met through some friends, but I never thought he was attractive or even interesting. But then I heard from other people that he would comment about how beautiful I was, and that's when he started asking me out. I kept saying no because I just didn't like him. But then he reached out to my cousin and asked her to convince me to go out with him. My cousin and I are super close and I always trusted her judgment. So I finally said yes to one date. I was in nursing school at the time, so I was really busy and actually really broke. So he paid for dinner and he even offered to help me pay my bills. I couldn't believe he was being so generous, but obviously at the time I didn't realize that he was just trying to control me. Here's where it gets really scary. 2 months later, he actually took me out on a date, and it was our wedding. That's right, he planned a whole wedding, got my parents' permission and everything. I show up to this date thinking we were gonna have dinner, but then he put me in a freaking wedding gown. I felt like I had no other choice, so I said yes. 2 weeks after we got married, he completely changed. He was totally abusive. He started brainwashing me to not even see my family. Part 2 is up. My dad pulls his gun out and shoots my husband in the you-know-what. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. My husband falls to the ground, looks at me and says that if I leave the house, he would kill me. But of course, I ran straight to my dad and we went home. My dad called an ambulance and they went to get my husband. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I never went to visit him once. I was so grateful to my dad for getting me out of that abusive relationship. But guess what? The abuse hasn't ended. My husband is suing me for abandonment. He's got his lawyers visiting me every single day, harassing me. I've noticed one man who keeps following me, and my car was broken into 2 nights ago. There's so much more, I think I'll have to make a follow-up story time. My dad is doing everything possible to get the divorce, and we're also trying to get a restraining order against my husband. I actually recently found pictures that I had taken of my bruises, so now I've got proof. Should I do a part 4? After my husband forced me into marrying him, he became a totally different person. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. He started brainwashing me into believing that I could never leave him, and that no one could ever love me, and he even started convincing me that my family hated me. It was just his way to keep me away from them. But my entire family had enough, especially my dad. My dad was a cop and he had dealt with a lot of abusive husbands in the past. So one night my dad comes to our very big, very beautiful house, and he asked my husband to let me go. That's when my husband grabs a bat from behind the door and starts swinging at my dad. My dad, being a cop, had his gun on him. He pulled it out and shot him in the you-know-what. That's when he looked at me and said that he would kill me if I left. Part 3 is up.
This is why you should never abandon your old toys. Once there was an old toy store, and on the top shelf in the back of this toy store was a doll. Every day this doll watched as people came into the store, but no one ever paid any attention to it, until one day its dreams came true. One girl named Lena came into the store and bought the doll, but things quickly took a terrifying turn. Although Lena liked the doll in the beginning, she quickly grew sick of it. Days and months passed and she ended up abandoning the doll like a piece of trash, until eventually Lena got into a fight with her mother when she said, "I never wanted the stupid doll anyways," but of course she could have never known the terrifying consequences this would lead to. One night as Lena slept in her bed, she heard a creaking noise. Then the noise moved closer and closer, until Lena's mother heard a scream coming from her bedroom. When she came in, she saw Lena on the ground, but it was how she looked that terrified her mother the most. Lena's arms and legs were bent in strange positions like a disjointed doll. Her mouth was sewn shut, but she looked desperately up at her mother, then to her desk, and on her desk was a note that said, "Now you know what it's like to be a doll." This is why you should always tell the truth. Once a young man moved into a new apartment, and there he saw something unbelievably terrifying. Let's just call him James. When James moved in, he got in the elevator and a beautiful woman stepped in after him. They had a great conversation and got off on the same floor. Then James realized that she was his new neighbor. He was so happy about this, but he could have never imagined the horrifying events that are about to happen. He unpacked some of his things and noticed a hole in the wall. He looked through it and realized that he can see his neighbor's room. He watched as she changed and got ready for bed, and soon this became his new habit. But one night things went from creepy to just horrifying. In the middle of the night, James heard loud groaning noises, so he looked into the hole in the wall again. There he saw his neighbor being attacked by a tall man with a dark beard, thin nose, and a scar on his cheek. James saw exactly what the attacker looked like, but the next day when police came to investigate his neighbor's unfortunate passing, James said nothing. He was afraid he'd get caught for spying on his neighbor before, but he would never know what this lie would cost him. Follow for part 2.